Okay, picture this. The year is 1927. The world is kind of holding its breath between two world wars, and in India, the movement for independence from Britain is hitting a fever pitch. And then, this book just drops, like a bombshell. An American historian writes a book that ignites this massive international firestorm, enrages an entire nation, and, well, forces a kind of brutal self-examination that, some would argue, was a long time coming.
And you know who had one of the most powerful reactions? The leader of the independence movement himself, Mahatma Gandhi. He called it the report of a drain inspector, a gutter inspection. But then look at the second half of that quote, a book that no European, but every Indian should read. What does that even mean? That single, incredibly conflicted quote. That's the key to understanding this entire crazy controversy.
So what on earth was in this book to provoke such a visceral, intense reaction? Let's dig into what it actually said and the incredible backlash it created, like almost overnight.
All right, so the author was Catherine Mayo, an American historian. She comes to India, but she's not there to study its politics or its incredible art. Nope. She said she was there to study the plain human facts of the land. Her focus was laser-sharp: public health, sanitation, and the social customs she believed were holding the country back. And she really honed in on the treatment of women, the caste system, and especially child marriage.
And the reaction? Man, it was fast. I mean, staggeringly fast. Mayo spends a couple of years doing research, and the second her book hits the shelves, it just explodes, instantly. We're talking public protests, a huge political outcry, and get this, effigies of her being burned not just in Calcutta, but in New York City too. And the literary world? They responded with a tidal wave of their own.
So, was this a deliberate hit piece? Was she just trying to attack India? Or did she think she had another mission in mind? Well, according to Catherine Mayo herself, the answer was all about what she chose not to look at.
In her own preface, Mayo basically says, look, I was an objective observer. She claims she deliberately avoided what she called uninteresting topics. Just small things like religion, politics, and art, to focus only on public health. Her whole question was supposedly simple. What would a health officer have to deal with during, say, a cholera epidemic? Her stated goal was to diagnose the health of an entire nation.
But to millions of Indians, that diagnosis felt more like a brutal public vivisection. So what did she actually write that caused all this fury? It really started with her most explosive claims.
Now, Mayo covered a lot of ground, but nothing was more explosive than her chapters on the condition of women in India. For her, the practice of marrying off girls who were still children was the fundamental social sickness from which almost everything else grew.
And at the center of this whole firestorm was just one number: 12. After a huge, drawn-out legislative battle in India, the age of consent for marriage had been raised from 10 to 12. Yeah. For Mayo, this wasn't progress. It was a horrifying confirmation of the entire problem. And to really drive her point home, Mayo didn't just use statistics. No, she filled her book with these absolutely harrowing, graphic anecdotes. Stories like this one, about a 10-year-old child bride. They were designed to shock her Western readers and directly confront her Indian readers. It was this unflinching graphic detail that made the book so inflammatory.
And this just laid bare a massive cultural divide. From Mayo's perspective, child marriage was a public health catastrophe. It caused trauma, it led to high infant mortality, it was a disaster. But the traditionalist view she documented saw it completely differently. It was a religious duty, a way to protect family honor, to control female sexuality. These weren't just two different opinions, they were two totally irreconcilable worldviews.
And, it did not stop there. Mayo's critique was, it was sweeping. She wrote about the awful fate of Hindu widows, who are often ostracized and blamed for their own husband's death. She went into detail about the inhumane conditions of the 60 million untouchables, who were denied basic human rights. She condemned everything from public sanitation to the paradox of worshipping cows while letting other animals suffer. It was a comprehensive and, to many, a deeply offensive takedown of the entire society.
So after all that, you can probably guess the reaction was going to be huge, but the sheer scale of the fury? Nobody saw that coming. India didn't just disagree with this book, it declared war on it. And you can literally see that war right here in this chart. The literary counterattack was just overwhelming. Catherine Mayo writes one book. In response,
Indian writers and politicians produce an entire library. We're talking over 50 books and pamphlets, with titles like Unhappy India and Sister India, all of them aimed at refuting her and defending their nation's honor.
The main accusation against her was pretty clear. This wasn't an honest critique, it was propaganda. Nationalists argued that Mother India was a racist, Indo-phobic piece of slander, written specifically to paint Indians as backward and unfit to rule themselves. They were convinced its real purpose was to justify British colonial rule and totally sabotage their fight for freedom. But wait, the story isn't over. It doesn't just end with a bunch of angry reviews. Nearly a century later, Mother India leaves behind this really complicated and deeply contradictory legacy. Let's take a look at how its shadow still lingers. Because here's the twist. Even as all the nationalist leaders were furiously trashing the book in public, behind closed doors, many of them had to kind of admit that Mayo's observations, while presented in a really offensive way, weren't entirely made up. The book was like a distorted funhouse mirror, but it was still a mirror, and it reflected some deeply uncomfortable truths.
And this is the great paradox of Mother India. It's fascinating. On one side, you have independence leaders like Gandhi calling it imperialist propaganda designed to keep India down. But on the other side, you have these incredible Indian social reformers, most famously Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the champion of the untouchables. And what are they doing? They're actually referencing and citing the very same book. For them, it was painful, but powerful, evidence they could use to demand radical social change.
So it all comes down to this, right? How can one single book be both a drain inspector's report and a catalyst for social reformers? How can it be colonialist slander and a tool for social justice? The story of Mother India is this powerful reminder that sometimes criticism, even when it's hostile, even when it's unwelcome, can become the unintentional spark for the very change it seems designed to prevent.